I've been through a bunch of different career changes, but the most recent before I retired, I was a data communications analyst for Verizon. Basically, in a data center where we monitored computer networks and corporate and government and hospitals and so on all around the world. And whenever there was a problem in their networks, we knew about it before they did even, and we would remote in and try to fix their problems or dispatch somebody else out to do it on at the site. My career was very unplanned. I started out, I was going to go into medicine, but my academic prowess wasn't good enough for that, and so I went into education, got a master's degree in education, and I taught for a few years in Europe. But along in there, I took a couple of courses in what was then called data processing, and that was back in the days of punch cards and no monitors. The only keyboard was on the card punch machine. And then, because the school was going to put in a very simple computer system, I was elected to be the instructor of computer science for the students. It was a bit of a disaster, but it was an introduction to mini computers. And from there, it kind of progressed uphill or downhill, depending on your opinion. I went from there to, when we came back to the U.S., I got a job in actually technical writing for a computer corporation that was developing accounting software. And I was writing the manuals for the accounting software. And then I moved into more software support. I was kind of the sales and technical support for the software packages. And then from there I moved to a military contracting firm, and I was doing technical support for U.S. military offices in Dayton, Ohio. And then, I guess in '92, we moved back to New Jersey, and I got a job as I was called a contract engineer, but basically I wrote and did specifications for government contracts for about 5 years. And then from there, I went to Verizon and went to data communications support. There was a lot of training in there as things changed, as technology changed, a lot of certification I went through. But I ended up in the data communications field. When I was in my senior year at college, looking to get into medical schools, I applied to all kinds of medical schools, and a very good friend of mine who was a second generation Dutch citizen and knew Dutch quite well, he got into University of Antwerp, which is he actually spoke Fries, which is a dialect of Dutch, so he had to learn Dutch, really Flemish, to speak, to go to the University of Antwerp. But he went there to pursue his pre-med, really his medical education. And so at the same time, kind of on his direction, I applied to University of Brussels, because they taught in French and somewhat in English. And ironically, I was accepted at University of Brussels, not really knowing what that meant. So I charged off to Belgium to go to med school. in Brussels. Turned out to be a disaster. French, it was all French, and my French was terrible. I actually came back for a year just to try to study up on French. Then went back with my wife, and she got a job teaching while I was trying to worm my way into the medical school. And that wasn't working too well, so I picked up a master's in education track from University of Southern California, who happened to be teaching in Belgium, teaching military kids, not kids, but military people getting some additional education. So I kind of got in on that and got a master's in education while I was in Belgium. Never made it to California for that. I've never been to the campus of the university, but I have a degree from USC. Well, at this point, I'm retired, follow my grandkids around a lot, and I'm big on investing, direct investment, and what else? A lot of church activity. My reason for that is because of so many years of my working life, I was limited in what I could do to serve the Lord. So now that I'm retired and in a relatively healthy state, I can contribute a lot of time to, to doing whatever the Lord calls me to do. In 2006, it was in August 18th of 2006, I had a heart attack. I didn't know I was in any trouble. I just thought I was, I'd have a lot of fatigue. I get tired out easily. Before that, just thought, oh, I'm just out of shape, too fat. And, my whole life was in front of a computer, for work or at home. So I was not in good shape. There were some warning signs I should have known to get myself checked out. Anyway, we were getting set to go on a 2-week vacation. We were going to leave on a Monday and travel down south, see my brother and my, and I guess a son and some friends, missionary friends down in the south. And then we were going to go down to Miami and get on a cruise ship and go to the Bahamas with another brother. And, that was the plan. It was going to be 2 weeks. We had it planned down every day where we were going to be, who we were going to be seeing. We were going to leave on a Monday. I was planning to work, I worked night shift, so I was going to work that Friday night and Saturday night, and then I'd be off Sunday night, and we would leave Monday morning. That Friday morning, early in the morning, about 3 in the morning, I got up, went to the bathroom, knew something was wrong and knew I wasn't feeling right, and suspected it was a heart attack. Wasn't in a great deal of pain. I just didn't feel right all over. And so I woke Libby up, my wife, and said, you better call an ambulance. I might be having a heart attack. Well, we lived opposite an ambulance house, so she just put on her bathrobe, went across the street, went right in. They had it staffed 24 hours, and they were very surprised to see this woman coming in frowsy with her hair all messed up, wearing a bathrobe. And she said, she thinks her husband's having a heart attack. Could they come? And they ran across, and they came up and got me and carted me down the stairs and took me out and put me in the ambulance. And they took me to a nearby hospital. There was a very good cardiologist there on duty at the time. And they got me stabilized and did some check. I guess, I don't know if they did any catheterization at that time. No, they didn't. That morning they decided I needed to go to a different hospital, so they packed me in another ambulance and took me, I guess it's about 10 or 12 miles to another hospital in the city of Camden. And there I went in, and don't know. I guess that was midday, mid-afternoon by then. No, probably still morning. And they immediately did some check, and they said we need to take him into surgery right away. Well, it wasn't until later in the afternoon, almost evening, when I finally went into surgery, and they did the emergency 5 bypasses that day. This was still the day of the heart attack. And they told Libby that I probably would not make it. I don't know if they use the word probably or possibly. They try to be as diplomatic as possible, but it wasn't looking good. Well, I survived it, and I was in a pretty bad state. And for the next 2.5 months, I was in Lady of Lourdes Hospital, and almost daily, if not weekly, there was one procedure or another. There were daily x-rays, there were all kinds of things they did, and I kept getting progressively worse. After my initial heart surgery, the quintuple bypass, they didn't tell me, but it's quite usual after that kind of surgery to have hallucinations, largely because of the drugs you're on after that and all the stuff that's pumped into you. Well, I had this hallucination that was kind of a TV series, because it took place over a couple of weeks, and it came in increments. It didn't come all at once, but everything was kind of linked together. And a hallucination is not like a dream, in that when you dream, it kind of quickly fades from your memory. If a half hour after you wake up, you can hardly remember it. You don't remember any of the details of the dream, just kind of the last few seconds before it ends. Well, in a hallucination, it is real. You are living it, and it doesn't go away, and you remember it like you were there. And in this hallucination, initially it started out, well, the hospital was turning the floor into a casino at night. And I think I was thinking that because of all the noise and the carts going up and down the hall. It was a very noisy room. So my mind was saying that's a casino going on out there. And through the course of the casino, there were a lot of bigwigs who allowed this to happen, who would come to the casino at night, including this was a Catholic hospital, and the Archbishop of Philadelphia would come, and the mayor of Philadelphia would come, and a lot of bigwigs were in there enjoying this casino at night. And I knew about it, and I was going to tell about it. And then they would, that would bring down the hospital, and when people would be laid off. So some of the nurses had it in for me because I was going to tell on them about this casino. And so I was in jeopardy. Even the union was coming after me, because there would be a lot of unionized people that would lose their jobs if this hospital got found out that they were running this illegal casino. Well, again, this takes place over a number of nights, dreaming this up. At one point, in order to get me off the floor when the casino came through, they moved me, and a couple of orderlies just kind of hauled my bed down to the basement, to this real dingy, dusty room. It was kind of an old operating room that they just moved me into, and it was very dark, and I was down in there, and these guys were joking and not paying attention to me, and I was almost dying all by myself down in the dungeon. And but I guess eventually they moved me back upstairs. Well, in the meantime, there were some people who knew about this and wanted to get me out of there to safety. And the plan was, at a certain point, they were going to airlift Libby and I out of the hospital by helicopter and fly us to Israel. And from there, well, basically for the next longest term after that, I kept thinking, well, I got to be ready to go. And what I thought was, then practicing with the helicopters landing on the roof and all that was actually the toilets, which was in the room getting flushed now and then and all that. But that was my thinking, oh, that's the noise of the helicopters, because there were a lot of noises like that. And the upshot was that I was going to fly to Israel by helicopter, and then we were going to set up a new world government. And in the government would be myself as kind of spiritual advisor, and then there would be Rush Limbaugh as political advisor. Oh, and there's a side story in all this too. And then there's another guy who is a colleague of mine at work, who's a very brilliant person, just a natural for knowing, finding solutions to problems and knowing his way around. And he was going to become kind of like a technical advisor to us. And the three of us were going to set up this world government from Israel. The side story is that part of this was all tied in with a bigger plot that was concocted by Rush Limbaugh, in which he was going to do a movie. And in this movie, I was going to kind of be a star person in the movie. And the gist of it was they were going to simulate a heart attack. And somehow I had signed up to, months earlier to agree to look into this. I didn't know that I agreed to be the patient. But the idea was they were going to fake a heart attack and then follow me through this heart attack sequence, kind of as a storyline. Well, halfway through this, the movie was going to be produced and the pilot was going to be shown in New York City, and somehow I was there, and Rush was out on the streets and there were crowds of people around him and lots of hoopla and all that, and he was, but I was kind of lost in the middle. Nobody ever talked to me, and I didn't, I was still kind of sick and bedridden. But the underlying story was this was all faked. I didn't really have a heart attack. Somehow in the middle of the night, they had snuck into the house and somehow rigged something that made it appear that I was having a heart attack. And so this whole thing was fake, and I wasn't really, and the, even through the transplant and all that, that was all fake. Well, what happened was that after 2 or 3 weeks out of surgery, my brain started to get in focus again. It took me a very long time to put together all what was real and what wasn't real, and to realize that's probably not right. And in the meantime, because I was on artificial respiration, I couldn't talk, so I couldn't communicate to Libby what was going on other than try to write. Well, my hands were very shaky, so I could barely write. She knew I was in a lot of distress, but she had no idea what it was all about, and I couldn't tell her. So it wasn't till after I was back in my right mind and could talk again, which was maybe a couple months later, I could tell this story. But it was so vivid, I could remember it many months later and write the whole story. Towards the end of that, it was kind of clear that I wasn't going to make it unless I had a heart transplant. Although they had predicted that was probably the likely outcome. They said, give it about 90 days and he's either going to come back or he's going to need a heart transplant. That's what they said at the very beginning. Well, Fortunately, lower bleeding, they couldn't do it because my insurance wouldn't cover transplant at that hospital, even though they do. So they started looking around for hospitals that would do it under my insurance. And it was a choice of either going to North Jersey or across the river into Philadelphia to University of Penn Hospital. And we chose University of Penn, which was a very good choice. And so they moved me by ambulance to University of Penn Hospital, sirens blaring and all that stuff, you know. And by the way, riding an ambulance may sound like fun and excitement. They are horrible to ride in because you're on a rough, you know, gurney with no cushioning, and those things are trucks, and they're going fast, and they're rough, and they bounce. They have you strapped down, but it about kills your back. So anyway, they got me to University of Penn. University of Penn took a couple days to do further testing and decide what was the best course of action. They immediately said, well, in order to keep you alive, we've got to put you on what's called a BiVAD, which is a VAD is a ventricular assist device that connects from your ventricle to your atria and assists the heart. It doesn't replace it, but assists it. And basically, you have a tube carrying blood out of the ventricle to a pump, which then pumps it back in the body to keep you alive. And I had one on each side, so that's why it was called a BiVAD. And there was this machine by the bed we called the R2D2. That was because it was about that height, and it was this box that made noises, and the thing made funny pumping noises. And every hour they had to come through and check to make sure blood was flowing okay and all that. And so they put me on that. That immediately moved me to the top of the list for heart transplants, because they could only keep me on that for no more than 30 days. After that, they would have to take me off. Some people have stayed on them longer, and they have actually portable units. But I was kind of not strong enough to be able to do that. And if they took me off, that would be the end. During the next 10 days, there was actually 2 transplants. Two hearts came available. One was in Florida. As I understand it, they flew down there, checked it out, and decided it wasn't in good enough condition for me, so they rejected that one. And then a few days later, another one came available. It was in Kentucky, and they prepped me for the surgery, and the heart arrived, and I went into surgery, and they did the transplant. That was, I guess at that point, it was November 13th of 2006. Well, that made an immediate difference, as you would expect, and my color kind of started coming back. But I was completely depleted. I was so weak I could not move my legs in the bed. I could not turn over on my own. I couldn't talk. I had no voice at all. Couldn't swallow. So I was going to need a lot of rehab. After 2.5 months flat on my back with my heart not working, there wasn't much left. My brain was still relatively functional, and I could breathe, but that was about it. So after a month at University of Penn, they transferred me to McGee Rehab Hospital, which is kind of a world-famous rehab hospital. They're not the kind of care where it's long-term care. They only do rehab. And they moved me in there, and I stayed there for 2 months till I could get back to the point where I could get myself out of a wheelchair to a walker. At that point, I could go home. So that was a total of about 5.5 months in hospital before I got home again. And then from home, I'd had to do, I guess it was 3 or 4 months of outpatient rehab. And then a little later on, I did another 3 months of cardio rehab. And I was still far from back to normal, so it took another couple of years to get back to feeling strong again. And by the way, in the middle of that, I had prostate cancer surgery and a few other things go on. So it was an interesting few years to get back to relative health. But it's been almost 9 years now, and I feel probably better than I did for 10 years before that all happened. I get asked that question a lot, and I even expected, okay, well, this is going to make a dramatic difference on my life, in that, you know, it's going to be a wake-up call that's going to make a big difference. I'm still the same person I ever was, except that when you've gone through an experience like that, you recognize that little things rarely really matter. And you become very much recognizing the fact that there's no use getting upset over little things in life. Even things that most people would consider big are not. There is nothing that big. Because at that point, you know, I was 59 when I had the heart attack, almost 60. I had raised my kids, they were out of the house. If the Lord had taken me at that point, it wouldn't have mattered. I mean, it would to the people that I left behind, but it wouldn't matter to me because I had lived a very interesting and full life, and I have endless stories to tell, and you know, I have nothing to regret. But the Lord let me stay at amazing cost. How it changed me, besides the fact that I now, since then, have 6 grandkids that I would never have seen, and maybe more on the way. That is, to me, a tremendous blessing. And they can also know me, which they wouldn't have. The story itself doesn't really reflect on me in any way, other than that's what the Lord took me through. Probably Libby, my wife, went through a lot more stress than I ever did, because all I did was lay there and did what they told me. I was probably a very good model patient, but there was nothing I could do except lay there. I don't know. You know, I can look back and say it doesn't matter what happens. I've had a wonderful life, and I do not. Anything the Lord would take from me at this point doesn't matter. And anything that the Lord allows me or gives me at this point is a blessing. Any way I can serve the Lord in some small way is a blessing too. I don't have any delusions of grandeur that I have any great skills or abilities for anything, but if I'm going to use, that's fine. Back in the day, you'd read about things like heart transplants and things like that. You never thought it would ever happen to you. And even when I was in the hospital and they'd talk about I may need a heart transplant, it's like, no way, that wouldn't be me. That's so rare. Nobody gets heart transplant. I got a heart transplant. The side story is about a woman named Vicky who came to the Lord kind of late in life. She was kind of a wild girl all through her youth. Got in lots of trouble. She had done the drugs and alcohol. She had been through 3 marriages. She had kids by a previous marriage. And then she met the Lord. And He turned her life around. And she married another man who was a Christian. Neither of them were educated in any way. They were very poor. He was a truck driver, mechanic kind of person. They lived in Chicago. She had virtually no education. And but she was talking with a friend, and this friend's sister came in, and the friend's sister was pregnant. She just basically announced she was pregnant and said she was going to get an abortion. Well, this upset Vicky, who, you know, was a young Christian at the time. She didn't know what to do about it. So she found some materials on what abortions are really all about, and she went and found this girl and read her some pamphlets on what what the abortion was all about. Well, she didn't hear from her for a little while, and then I guess it was getting closer to delivery time, the girl came back and said, you know, I've got to find a place to live. She was actually a prostitute, and she had no job because she was pregnant, no income, and she needed a place to live. So Vicky and her husband took her in and kept her till the delivery, and the baby was born while the girl was living at their house. Well, Vicky took the baby then, and keep in mind, Vicky and her husband had adult kids at this time, so they're near adult kids. So she was not a young person, and so she kept the baby and took care of it. The girl didn't have any clue how to be a mother. She didn't take care of the baby. She never even changed the diaper. She just kind of went away, and Vicky would take care of the child, and she'd come back occasionally and check on the child. Well, one day Vicky was sick. She had the flu, so she took the child. His name was Robert, actually, and she took Robert to her sister to take care of while she got over the flu. And the girl came back and wanted her baby, and said she was going to leave and go to California with her baby. And Vicky said, no, you're not. You're not going to take this baby, and I'm not going to give it to her because you don't know how to take care of it. And she pitched a fit, and she threatened. She said, well, I'm going to go to the cops unless you give me the baby. And Vicky said, well, okay, you go to the cops. We'll get the cops in here and the social services people, and we'll let them decide. If they feel you can take the baby, then okay, we'll get you the baby. Well, the girl knew that she would not be allowed to keep that baby because she didn't know how to take care of it. And I believe that she had lost the baby previously when social services took it away because she wasn't taking care of a previous baby. Well, she went off. She went to California, and about 4 years later, she finally came around to allowing Vicky and her husband to adopt Robert. So that basically the story of Robert, except that when he was 17 and a half, he had just gotten his driver's license. He was driving with some other high school kids. He wasn't being bad or anything. He was a very good kid, very talented musician, just a real fine Christian boy. But the car slid off the road, hit a tree sideways, and he was killed. He was kept alive long enough to donate his heart and kidneys and liver and so on. And I am the recipient of his heart. And it was several years later when I met up with Vicky and got the story. And amazing person, very charismatic person, but she told me all about Robert, and we saw his pictures, and the pictures are kind of the hardest part of it because he looked a lot like our sons, so that was tough. But one of the things she wanted to do was put her head on my chest to hear her son's heart, and which I, of course, let her do. But she died not too long after that, so I've only seen her once, and other than we had been writing back and forth a little bit before that, and it was a real blessing to meet her. So that's a side story of kind of how the Lord works. In this case, 17 years before I had need of Robert's heart, he was working in Vicky's life. I've told you some highlights of my story. Highlights, lowlights, I don't know. But there's a story there. Sometimes it's of your experience with the Lord and how He works. Sometimes it's just life in general. But everybody's got a story. You've heard a little bit of mine. Now you have a chance to tell your story.